And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we have a recipe that we're honestly a little surprised we haven't done before now, for pulled pork. Now, I'd like to remind everyone before we get started that we have a Patreon. If you'd like to support us there, you can check the link in the description below. We also have an affiliate link with Chef's Temp if you need a kitchen thermometer or meat probe. Check out the link for that, and use code LOVEYOURFOOD on checkout for 15% off your order. In the meantime, here's the ingredients for our pulled pork. So we have a pork butt, which is shoulder, a chipotle pepper, some paprika, some black pepper, some coriander, some fennel, and some cumin, some molasses. We're actually using date syrup, some apple cider vinegar, some salt, onions, some hot sauce. We're using some of our hot pepper relish, some tomato paste, some Dijon mustard and some Worcester sauce, and some bourbon. So the first thing we're going to do is break up and grind up all of our spices. So we don't really need to toast these because they're going to be hitting a hot pan in a little while once they're on the pork and get a good sear on them. So we're just going to blitz them up until they're in a nice fine powder. Don't worry if you get any like chunks of chipotle skin in there or stem or anything like that. You can always pull those out. Next thing we're going to do is cut our pork into 4 roughly equal pieces. Now, if you get a boneless pork shoulder like this, also known as like a picnic roast. If it's boneless, it frequently has some sort of odd-shaped pieces. So don't worry about them being all exactly the same shape, but you just want to get them all roughly the same size. So this one had this one piece that's kind of all spread out, but it's fine. It worked out just perfectly. So first thing we're going to do is get the spice rub, this is our dry rub, onto the pork. And we're going to use almost all of it. We don't want to apply all of it just yet, because we're going to use a little bit more of it when we make the sauce a little bit later. Now, traditionally, this usually also includes brown sugar, which we didn't include in this, and it came out a little less sweet, which is right up our alley. But if you want to add a little brown sugar, you can. And again, this is supposed to be molasses. We used date syrup because we found we didn't have any molasses, and we did have date syrup on hand. And it came out really nice. It was delicious. It didn't change the flavor all that much. And it turned out very, very well. So we're going to add all of our wet ingredients here. So that's the Worcester sauce, the Dijon mustard, the tomato paste, the date syrup, and some of the apple cider vinegar. We're going to save some of this and use it later. And then we're going to add the hot sauce in there as well. And this is going to form the basis of the sauce for our pork, our pulled pork. In go the rest of those dried spices that we ground up. And then we're just going to mix that until it's well combined and let that sit aside and sort of come together a little bit. And that's going to be, we're going to use that in a couple of different ways, and we'll show you that as we go on. Next thing we're going to do is dice up our onions, and we just want these to be ready for us when we need them. We're not going to be using them just yet. We have a couple of steps to do first. So once we've got those nicely diced, we are going to start the searing process. And your pork should be, have the dry rub on it and sitting around for a little while. So now we're going to add a little bit of salt, and these are going to hit the hot cast iron fat side down. So a little bit of salt, and then fat side down. And we're just trying to get a good sear on all of the sides because you get that beautiful Maillard reaction. We get that nice toasty flavor, that nice seared flavor on there. It also is going to toast all those spices. A little bit of salt on the other side once the first side has a good sear on it. Now this is a little darker than we were hoping for, but those spices just kind of blackened a little bit on there. It's not burnt, or the meat at least isn't burnt. Some of the spices might be, but it's fine. It gives you that little bit of that smoky flavor. We don't have a smoker any longer, so we can't get that nice smoky aroma, but this is a good way to get it. So we're just going to make sure we get a good sear on all of the sides, including the sides. You want to make sure you get them sort of standing up at some point. Then we're going to add in our onions. And just as those onions are starting, we're going to start taking out the pieces of pork now that they're all nicely seared. We don't want to cook them through. We just want to sear the outside. So these are still going to be pretty much raw all the way through and seared on the outside. Now we're going to add this into a little bit of, it could be water, it could be chicken stock. We used a little bit of chicken powder in here. And it's just going to sit in there for a little while. And we're going to make sure that these onions get nice and toasty in there. And also the onions are going to pull up some of the foam from the bottom there. Now, once the onions are cooked, nice and sort of wilted, and they've released some of that moisture and soaked up some of the flavor from the cast iron, we're going to put that in here beneath the pork. So we're going to take the pork out. We're going to drop those onions in. And you can see they've pulled up all that flavor from the bottom of the cast iron, all that beautiful spices and the pork fat and all that sort of stuff. It's all going to go in there. You got that beautiful flavor. We're going to deglaze that with a little bit of... you can use water, you can use stock, whatever you prefer. And make a nice even layer of those onions down there. And you can see they're very, very toasty. And then we're going to add our pork back in on top of the onions. And we're just going to let those cook on top of that little bed of onions in the sauce. And then we're going to add some of the sauce we made on top of the pork. We don't want to add all of it because we want some of this for saucing later. So we're going to reserve some of that for a little bit later on. You can see in there, it's all starting to boil in there. We've got this on the heat. And then we're going to add in our bourbon. Now you want to make sure you're not washing all of the sauce off of your pork. So the bourbon, we're just trying to add it into the gaps in there. And once we've got the bourbon in there, we're going to cover that. And this is going to go in the oven. Now, this sort of thing, pulled pork is typically a low and slow cooking method. So we're going to put this in the oven covered at a low temperature for a long, long time. We put this in for a few hours covered. And then after a few hours, we took that out and it looked something like this. So you want to be careful getting that out of your oven. Now, it's going to look a little dark around the edges, but that is fine. And you can see in here, it has reduced quite a bit. The pork is gorgeous. It is really, really nice. But the top, because it's been covered, it's sort of steaming in there. And we've put these in there fat side up. We want to put that back in the oven uncovered so the top gets a little bit of crispiness on top as well. So back in the oven, again, low temperature for another hour or so. And then we have this beautiful, beautiful pork. And this is, the pork is cooked. It's been cooking for hours. It is done. And everything in here, don't worry, we're going to use everything in here. And you can see just a fork will just pull that pork right apart. It has that nice crust on top from being uncovered. And we are going to pull the pork out of the pot here and set it aside. And that fat on top is all nicely rendered. The meat is cooked all the way through. It is super, super tender. In fact, it's sort of falling apart. And then we're going to go in here and we're going to skim the pork fat off because we want to use everything else in here. So the onions, the remainder of the sauce, that stock, just the juices from the pork that aren't the fat. We want to use all of that. It's full of flavor, so we want to get as much of that out as we possibly can. And then once we've skimmed as much fat off as we can, we are going to add that into the remainder of our sauce. So we've got the pork drippings, we've got the onions in there. You can use some of the drippings to get the stuff off the side. A little bit more of that apple cider vinegar. And then we're going to blend this together, and that is our beautiful, really, really amazing sort of barbecue sauce for this, while we're letting our pork that has been cooking for hours rest a little bit before we start to pull it. Now, pulling pork is very, very easy. You just get a couple of forks, and now just exactly what you see Chef Caleb doing here. So we're just going to gently tug it apart and let the fibers sort of separate. And then once you've got as much as you want, and be careful because it sort of fluffs up a little bit. It's more than it looks like. And then once you've got enough, we're going to add some of our sauce. Now, at this point, you can sauce it more or less to your taste. We wanted to, add a little bit of sauce, but we don't like it to be drowned in it. So we use just a little bit. And then some traditional sort of barbecue sides. We've got some raw red onion. You can use white onion. I think is a little bit more traditional even. And some nice just kosher dills. Those nice sour pickles go really, really well with barbecue. And we have some little buns here, some little dinner rolls. These are an attempt at Parker House rolls, and we're going to do a better recipe for these next week. This recipe didn't turn out very well. It turns out our yeast was a little bit tired, so it didn't rise quite as much. But the ones we did next week are going to look a little nicer. So a little bit of that raw onion, some of the pulled pork, and some of that beautiful pickle on there. And that's it. That's the whole thing. Really, really delicious. Super rich and very filling. We ate. It was incredible, actually. A lot of flavor. Perfectly tender. It's a few steps, but it's honestly not that hard. And we hope you'll give this one a try. If you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. We'd also like to thank our patrons over on Patreon. I'll put a link in the description below if you'd like to check us out and support us there. And remember to love your food.